Welcome to Understanding Clarkston's Historic District. My name is Julie Meredith, and I am the director of the Clarkston Independence District Library, and I will be your facilitator today. So, why have I been asked to do this? A library is an organization of lifelong learning, and librarians gather and disseminate information. We are professional researchers. It is my job to remain neutral and pull together information so the person that I am assisting can clearly look at a topic. While I am not a professional facilitator, several years ago, the library received a grant to have staff trained by the Harvard Institute to conduct community conversations, techniques that help communities talk and listen to each other. Today I'm here to use both my librarian and Harvard training to assist you in gathering information about Clarkston's historic district. I was born and raised in Clarkston. I graduated from Clarkston Community Schools. I worked as a librarian in Ohio and Michigan, served as part of the state librarian's team at the Library of Michigan, and have been the library director here for 18 years. I care very deeply for this community, but I lived in Independence Township when I lived in this community, and I don't live in the village of Clarkston at this time, nor do I live in Clarkston proper or Independence Township. So Bill Bowman is our library's IT manager. Bill worked for the library for 17 years and has also been trained in the Harvard techniques. He has been dedicated to serving this community, despite the fact that he does not work or that he does not live in the district. He serves a dual role today as my Harvard partner and assisting with the technologies. Hope the technology goes well. We're all going to say thank you to Bill. Presenting today, we have Ron Campbell, Preservation Architect for Economic Development and Community Affairs for Oakland County, and Janet Kreger, Founding Member and past President of Michigan's Historic Preservation Network. They will speak about historic preservation in Oakland County and Michigan and how that relates to Clarkston's historic district. We are not voting on Clarkston's ballot in November and offer our services only to assist you in gathering information about historic preservation and Clarkston's historic district, not about the ballot proposal itself. This is not a debate. We are here to inform, not persuade. This is not a town hall. We are not city officials. This is not a rally. There are no campaign materials in the room. This is an information gathering session for you about historic preservation and the local historic district. Please listen to the speakers and perhaps take notes. You should process what you hear today. Reach out if you have questions and formulate your own opinion. Okay, you're in the library, so the library gets to go first. I'm going to talk to you about our Clarkston Historic District website. And I have to switch microphone. Hold on. Can you still hear me? Woo! Thank you, Bill. Okay, so on your agenda there is a website at the bottom of the page, clarkstonhistory.org. Oh, thank you. Okay, so in 1994, the previous library director secured a Library Services and Construction Act, known as LSCA grant, from the Library of Michigan to create a website to gather and house local history information. This was in the infancy of the internet, so this project was really cutting edge for its time. Susan and Bill Basinger partnered with her to create the Community Information Network website. It was coded in raw HTML and it still exists. I'll show it to you here. Classic website. And it come up. There it is. And there was a historic district walking tour where you could actually go through and tour house by house. Very cutting edge for 1994. But in 2018, we started the process of transitioning the site to a new modern database platform. So let's go back to this new modern database platform. The library hired local website company IGD Solutions to work on this project with us. The database format allowed us to create and record for each property in the historic district and compile data in a one-stop shop, including history, architectural details, photos, documents, links, and more. Some properties have lots of detail, some only a little. We include what we have and can add to the record when new details are discovered. The database allows us to easily upload, correct, and even create whole new categories of information as needed. So let me just give you a little bit of an idea. So if I go to buildings by address, and I'm going to hop down to North Main Street, and I'm going to scroll down and just pick one. 58 North Main Street. So here we have all of the house on 58 North Main Street and all the information about this house. And there's quite a lot here. History, information about the architecture, property description, significant property history all the way back to 1844 when it's changed hands, and then Historic District Commission documents. I can do something similar. I can hop back to the beginning, go to buildings by address. I can hop into Buffalo Street. And I can hop down to, let's try which one. Picture of the house, information, even some additional pictures. Residents are allowed to give us things to put up on the site. If you have interesting pictures of your historic home and you would like to share them, we are happy to scan them and put them on the website for you. As we developed the website, we identified 4 types of users. I'll go to the front. Visitors, youth, historians, and homeowners. So you can go into each of those areas and it directs you to different information depending on the amount of information you would want. So if you go into the visitor section, it's a little more streamlined, it's a little bit shorter. If you go into the youth section, it's more kid-oriented. If you go into the in-depth, it's absolutely everything we have. My favorite part is the youth section. Our school outreach coordinator collaborated with the school district and the Historical Society to create and post the downtown walking tour field trip that all second graders take in the spring. It's part of Michigan curriculum for second graders to study local history. In the spring, these kids go on this field trip, and this is the actual field trip that they take. I don't know if it'll pop up. There we go. They start here. And they walk through downtown. If a child were to miss this field trip, they would be able to take this tour using a phone or a tablet and walk this themselves. If they are inspired by anything that they see on their trip and they want to take it back and show their parents, this is posted on the website and they can take their parents on the exact same tour that they went on. My other favorite part is our actual walking tour. There's the Historic District walking tour. This is a sort of a rebuild of the original walking tour. You can pick any of the streets and it'll show you exactly where you're going to start. So this one's on Buffalo. It starts here, it goes down Buffalo Street, and then back up. So if you start right here on 7 Buffalo, there's the house at 7 Buffalo, and you can click on these arrows and it'll take you one by one, down the street and back up the street. So you can go on your own tour using your phone or a mobile device. Another really cool feature that we added because of modern technology, thank you for technology, is our interactive map. So the interactive map, this is the actual Oakland County Historic District map. See down here where it says Oakland County, Michigan? And IGD Solutions made this live, which means if you click on any of these little numbers, it takes you directly to that house. And everything that we have on the house. Okay, last but not least, this is really cool, and we thank the Historical Society for this one. The then and now photos. I love the then and now photos. So this is the Main Street then and now photo with a slider. Oh, old and new.
That deserves a round of applause.
And I have more than one. Historic. This one hardly even fits on the page, it's so big. It's historic, modern. And then this is probably the only opinion you'll hear from me today. This is one of my favorite houses on Main Street. I love this house on Main Street. I love this picture. And then, of course, this guy as well. So we hope to further build out this site to include other types of historic information like newspapers, yearbooks, etc. I highly recommend checking out the Clarkston Historic District website to see the wealth of information that has been gathered about the community. And you can get to that at www.clarkstonhistory.org. Any questions about that? No? Okay, very good. I'm going to vacate this seat so that Mr. Bowman can prep for the next thing. So the next thing we're going to do on our agenda, we have Nancy Moon, the chair of the Historic District Survey Committee, and she will provide an update regarding the Clarkston Historic District Survey.
I don't stand at the podium, so I hope that I don't need a mic.
You have to stand next to the mic.
I have to speak to the mic? Okay.
Otherwise, I won't hear you.
Can everybody hear me? I'm sorry, I have asthma, and this is not the ideal weather for an asthmatic person to be speaking. The Clarkston Historic District Study Committee, I'll sort of give you a status of where we are today. Next slide. Okay. Just to give you a timeline for the city, because there's a lot of dates, a lot of things that have been floating around, and it's kind of confusing what's what. Okay. The village of Clarkston was platted out in 1832 by the two Clark brothers. It became registered as the Clarkston Historic District on the state of Michigan site July 16, 1976. The Clarkston Historic District was listed on the National Register May 15, 1980. And then the Clarkston Historic District was established in 1981. So once everything had been approved through the government agencies, then it became Chapter 152, labeled Historic District, in our city government documents. And the village was incorporated as a city in the village of Clarkston in 1992. Lots of dates, right? Okay, the beginnings of the study committee. The city council established a committee in December of 2019 to update the records at both the state and the National Registry for the Historic District. Oh, you can't hear me? Thank you, Maggie. And this data needs to be updated periodically, and it has been a few years since we have done so. The State Historic Preservation Office provided an in-house training program for the committee in February of 2020. However, the pandemic came shortly thereafter, so the committee sort of got a late start, which is why we didn't finish it until 2024. The results of the study committee. First thing, no changes have been made to the boundary that was originally established between 1976 and 1979. All of you should have a picture of the current map that is maintained by Oakland County of the Historic District here in Clarkston. That map was established by a third party. At that time, the village hired two different organizations to create and establish the historic district, set up the boundaries, and help put all the documentation together to send to the state. Now, in today's world, it's a lot different. One of the documents that we had to create was the district summary. And it had two main features, maybe about 15 pages long by the time we got it finished, but we had to describe the streetscape of each neighborhood. So that means Miller Road, North Holcomb, Buffalo, East Washington, West Washington. Each one of those neighborhoods is very different. We had to decide, do they have curbs? Do they have sidewalks? Do they have easements? Are there fences in front of the house along the sidewalk, etc.? So that each one has its unique perspective known as the streetscape. The other thing we had to do was photos. Getting current photos was quite easy. Getting historic photos was not so easy. The second set of documents we had to create was one for every residential and commercial building. There's 172. We had to do every one of them. We had to describe the architectural details. What type of house, what type of windows, what type of foundation, etc. The description had to be such that somebody could make a sketch of the house without seeing a picture. Then we had to define the history. What changes have been made to that particular structure over time? For those that were, 1850, 1870, it was pretty hard to figure out what changes had been made, and even today it's hard to keep track of what changes have been made. We also had to provide photos, current and historic photos. It was wonderful. A lot of homeowners provided photos that they had been given by the previous owner. Some of the long-term residents offered photos, and then the Clarkston Community Historical Society gave us a large box of slides, which we then read in, converted them to photographs on the computer, so we could use those as well. So that's where our historical photos came from. Then we had to say, why is this house significant? Okay. 71 North Main was easy. It was one of the original Clark houses. But 172 structures took a lot of time and effort to say, why is this one important? Why is this house important? But they all are important. They're an integral part of the historic district. The third set of documents that we needed were called landscapes. We have 3 landscape areas within our historic district. Everybody's familiar with the Mill Pond. Obviously, we had to define it. It's got a lot of history. It's been in the Clarkston News for many years. That one was not too difficult. We also had to do Depot Park. Some of you may not realize, but that used to be the city dump. Yeah. And then we had to do Park Lake, which seems like it wouldn't be significant, but it is. It's the boundary on the north side and the east side of our historic district. Now, everybody should have this map. I think I tried to give everybody handouts, so everybody should have this map. Now, I've talked about a lot of organizations. There's a lot of things they talked about, but I want to sort of give you a picture of where the study committee fits into everything else that's been going on. First of all, at the top, we have the National Register of Historic Places. Remember, that's where we were registered in 1980. That is part of the U.S. National Park Service. They are the ones who establish the guidelines and the requirements to be in a historic district. They then coordinate with the State of Michigan Historic Preservation Office. That is truly a government office in Lansing. They manage the benefits of a certified historic district. For example, tax credits, which I believe Janet's going to give you more information on later. And it also handles, if you live in a historic home and you want an appeal, you go to the Historic Preservation Office and they handle those. Now there's a third area that they handle. It's called the Certified Local Government. The Village of Clarkston is eligible to become a certified local government. It would be nice if we had time and place and resources to do that, because they do provide grant money. Then we have the historic district itself, and it works directly with the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service, because that's who established the guidelines and the requirements for us to maintain a certified historic district. Now, on the right side, you will see there's the village of the city of Clarkston City Council. Okay? They appoint all the historic district commissioners. They also created the Historic District Study Committee. Now, if you notice, the Clarkston Historic District Commission people work directly, and their job is to preserve the Clarkston Historic District, meeting the requirements from the state and the federal government. Now, the study committee is down here all by itself, and it works directly with the State Historic Preservation Office. They provided the documents that we had to complete. They provide the rules, they provide the guidelines. I realize it's a lot of detailed information of who reports to whom. Okay. Now, the survey status. Okay. The preliminary report, and I'm saying preliminary report, was accepted by the State Historic Preservation Office on September 3rd of 2024. Okay, that is the majority of the work that we had to get done. And we got a pretty good, you know, did we get an A++? No, but we got a B++, okay? There's a few things we have left to do. They gave us 2 recommendations from the review committee that we need to complete in order to have our same documents be accepted by the federal government to update our records at the state, or at the federal registry office. We have 1 year in which to do that. And they're basically, the federal government has some different guidelines of things that you have to describe. I was completely unaware of those, the committee was unaware of those, so we will do those and then we will proceed with the next step. Once this is all done, which will be 2025, all these survey documents will be uploaded into the website that Julie was just talking about. So for each particular house that will be uploaded, we will be adding to that website the 3 landscapes, and we'll be adding the district survey. Okay. When we did this district survey, we did 2 things for Depot Park. Okay. We went through and identified all the trees. We were given an initial report from Jonathan, and we went through and updated it with additional trees that have been added since that report had been done. And we went through and identified all the benches. And those, both trees and benches, were memorials that had been given to the village. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, so our main event is the presentation, Michigan's Preservation Program, the benefits for strong local programs doing good work. This is actually a 2-part program. Part 1 will be presented by Ron Campbell, Preservation Architect for Economic Development and Community Affairs for Oakland County, and Part 2 will be presented by Janet Kreger, founding member and past president of Michigan's Historic Preservation Network. But they are going to do some tag teaming, I've heard, because they are accustomed to presenting together. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of them before we begin, and then I'll let them run with it. So Ron, AIA, is a principal planner and preservation architect for Oakland County Planning and Economic Development Services. He provides design and technical assistance for Oakland County's 28 Main Street communities and preservation assistance for more than 300 historic resources in 62 municipalities throughout the county. He has aided projects ranging from the national landmark structures at Cranbrook to resources at the local level. Prior to joining the county, Ron was a senior partner in a successful Michigan architectural and engineering firm where his work received international, national, and local design recognition for educational facilities, religious structures, theaters, historic preservation, and community planning and design. He served on the National Main Street Leadership Council and president of the Main Street Architects representing 44 states with Main Street coordination programs. He was appointed to the Michigan Barrier-Free Design Board and served on the Michigan Construction Code Commission. In addition to numerous speaking engagements, Ron is an author and speaker on many topics on preservation and the built environment. He co-authored Michigan's Destination Depots, Lighthouses Along the Rivers of Steel. He was recently honored with Michigan Historic Preservation Network Lifetime Achievement Award. Born and raised in Flint and resides in Davison, Michigan, he remains involved in many history and preservation efforts, in disaster and preservation assistance in Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Louisiana, and throughout Michigan. Janet Kreger is the past president of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network, the state's nonprofit membership organization that she helped found in 1981. Janet graduated from the University of Michigan in 1972 with a Bachelor of Arts in American History. In 1976, she graduated from Columbia University with a Master's of Science in Historic Preservation. For 12 years after graduation, Janet worked for Michigan State Historic Preservation Office, now part of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. At one time or another, she was responsible for every federally mandated program area. Of MHPN accomplishments, Janet personally is most proud of winning legislative approval of amendments that kept the state enabling legislation, PA 169 of 1970, up to date. Inaugurating commissioner training workshops in 1999. Winning legislative approval for the first state 25% preservation tax credit in 1999, and then helping win it back in 2020. Accepting protective easements starting in 2006. Providing gap financing for under-resourced projects starting in 2009. Helping design the revolving loan program in 2013, and holding the statewide conference for 44 consecutive years. Janet maintains her credentials under the professional qualification standards set by the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, 36 CFR Part 61 for architectural history. In recognition of her first decade's work in Michigan's preservation movement, she was awarded honorary membership in the American Institute of Architects in 1999. In 2005, she was named by Michigan Historic Preservation Network as that year's Lifetime Achievement Award winner. Additionally, she was recognized as a 2012 Distinguished Volunteer by the Historical Society of Michigan. She continues to serve as a full-time volunteer for MHPN. So we are very fortunate to have them both here today to give us more information on historic districts in general and also locally. And I welcome you both.
I have to learn technology every time. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. Thank you for coming out. This is a pretty good turnout. And it's just to hear me speak about one of my favorite topics, historic preservation. I'm going to start by, did you know that there are approximately 20,000, a little less than 20,000 cities, townships, and villages in the United States? Yeah, okay, good. Did you know, out of those, 2,300 have historic district commissions? Okay, that's about 10%, a little more than 10%. Michigan, of that, we have 1,773, what we call CVTs. Of those, 81 communities have historic district. A little bit less than the national average. But we are proud to say nearly 20% of those, or 16 of them, are here in Oakland County. That's tremendous. I think that is a great statistic. It shows how the county's performing. And then I put this in. I'm not going to read it, but you can read it. It's and I thought it was kind of an all-inclusive. It's the mission statement from Farmington Hills Historic District. I will put on a couple of things. Their mission to reflect the elements of cultural, social, economic, political, and architectural history, stabilize and improve property values and adjacent to such districts. I want to kind of cover on those parts. What is it that historic preservation does? And it hits on all the cylinders, I think. Now, I have to tell you a little story. Oh, before I tell you a little story, I got to go through Oakland County. It is incredible. We have 227 state and local registered sites, historic sites. It includes everything from barns to national landmark structures, such as we have at Cranbrook and at Meadowbrook. We also have one national natural landmark, and that is out at Haven Hill, which is Highland Recreation Area. It used to be Edsel Ford's retreat. He called it his nerve retreat. Doing a great job out there preserving the buildings that remain. But we also have 16 historic communities and 20 historic districts within those communities. I think Southfield is the most recent. And they put on the National Register a district that comprises mid-century modern. So, yeah, save that shag carpet because you don't know that. Someday it will be historic. But quite a range. Now, the little story I was going to tell you is when I was at the University of Michigan in the School of Architecture and Planning, we had a final project. It was my master's report, and it contained about an 8-block area in an urban center. 8 blocks full of buildings, parking decks, things like that, right along the river. out of the half dozen students I did it with, I was the only one that kept the buildings. 3 of them. They were high-rise, 15 stories or more. And everyone else started with a clean site. And my instructor kept saying, why don't you, you're putting extra work on yourself. Why don't you just clear the site? I just had a problem with it. I didn't know how to identify it. But it was something I looked at and said, God, these have been here for 50, 60 years. Why can't we reuse them in some form or fashion? It doesn't make sense to me. Get to the jury, right? I'm still the only one that has those 3 buildings. And one of the first questions that came out of the reviewers, my jury they would call it, was, why did you keep the buildings? Well, I don't know, I just thought they would be good to keep. And after the presentation, I was about halfway there, the other half of the students I knew it, they kept referring back to that presentation that kept the buildings. And it made sense. It made sense to them. And it gave me credibility in the sense that I was right. Or at least some people thought I was right, in that preserving and recycling our buildings made all the difference. So what is the greenest building in America today? Well, it could be a building you don't have to build, right? Why? Because it already exists. If we can recycle our pop cans and our pop bottles, why can't we recycle buildings? It doesn't make sense not to. I forget, it was Don Rickma, he was the economist out of Washington, D.C. He actually did the figuring on this, and he said, taking a 1-story, 2,500 square foot building and turning it back into viable use saves the equivalent of 1,400,000 pop cans. Okay, that begins to make sense to me. Did you know that our building waste accounts for 40%, I'm sorry, not waste, building accounts for 40% of raw materials every year? So every new building we take, it costs us a tremendous amount of natural materials that we're running short of. It also accounts for 30 to 40% of our landfill every year. So every time you tear down a building, where does it go? Most of it goes to the landfill. Now, you remember the 1980s, 70s, 80s? Our downtowns were really getting pretty shabby. Businesses were closed. They moved out where? To the malls, to strip development. And that left our downtowns vacant. Then, an idea came out of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And that idea was to, let's help our downtowns get them back on the same track as the malls. That's why I look at it. How do the malls operate? Well, under 4 principles. Design. Have good design in our downtowns. Have economic development, diversity of the businesses that are there. Have a platform from which they can promote the downtown. And 3, organization, which this is a grassroots effort. It involves everyone in the downtown area. Now, they set it on a state-by-state basis. They created a coordinating program, they call. Each state, or 40 states participated in it. Michigan is one of them. But you say, well, wait a minute, Oakland County, we have one. Yes, we do. We're the only county program in the United States that is run by the county. Wow, why is that? You have Michigan, you have a county, no one else has it. Well, come to find out, Michigan did have it at one time, long before Oakland County had it. And change of government, they decided to go without it. We're going to disband the Main Street program. Now, you might have heard the name Mel Brooks Patterson. He said at the time, I think that is an economic driving force of our downtowns. What Main Street is doing for downtowns needs to continue. And he went to the National Trust and he argued. He said, we ought to be allowed, if the state doesn't want to do it, we ought to be allowed as a county to become our own coordinating program. We have 1.3 million people. We have at least 50-some counties, that's CVTs, that would qualify for this. Why not let us run our own program? And the National Trust said, well, yeah, it begins to make sense. We're going to let you do it. So we are the first, and we are the only, still the only one that does it. Now, there have been other entities that come in. But, so the downtowns, from that first slide you saw, has transformed. Neither one of these are Clarkston or even from Michigan. Okay? I didn't want to prejudice anybody on this. But look at one-year statistics of what we've accomplished. Oakland County started in 2000. Hear about that? 28 communities now participate in the program. Clarkston is one of them. And from 1923, this is 1923 statistics on, we collect these every year. We're required to report those to a National Main Street organization. And of course, they go to the Board of Commissioners too. $8.8 million were invested in our downtown areas, plus $79 million in rehabbing 123 buildings. 249 new, and this is net jobs, were created in those communities. 185 net new businesses were created. And we had just under 500,000 in cash donated to MSOC communities in the programs. So it is astonishing, and this is all from a preservation-based economic development program that includes historic preservation as part of the process. So now what does that all have to do? Well, what about the residential side of things? If we got it covered in the downtown area, what about the residential? We've been hearing for some time, well, historic district communities actually hold their value back. They actually higher value through home prices. Well, is that so? We saw that in other states, but we never did the actual survey here until MHPN got the grant to do it. So what they did, and this is online, you can check the statistics. They took four communities, beginning with Ann Arbor, and what they were looking for was identical communities within that one community to compare, neighborhoods I should say. They were looking for identical neighborhoods. The only distinction between those neighborhoods was the fact that one was historic designation and one was not. They were looking basically for the same school district, the same age of housing, as much as they could, and the only difference being the historic designation. What happened in Ann Arbor? Well, they found that 11% higher value in a historic district in 2000. It added another 16% more value in 2010. And overall, 6% more value between 2010 and 2015. Now, the nice thing about this, we had the depression, I'll call it a depression, there in 2009. So we saw values both on the high side as well as during the period of slump. And even then, districts held their value. This one was, I took the wrong slide. Another one in Bay City. This was a little bit more difficult. We saw consistently higher values from 2003 to 2016. It was a little unreliable statistics up until 2015. So we admit to that. There wasn't the information that we needed. But overall, from the value increase, 14.6% more value in historic district than non-historic district in 2016. Grand Rapids. This was probably the most productive one. Value here in 2004 was 35% more value than non-historic district. On average, it was 28 to 29% value from 2015 to 2010 to 2015. And this was a very high percentage, nationally speaking. This is in the upper percentile. I said it already. So, and last but not least was Kalamazoo. This added 12.6% more for a historic district in 2000 than a non-historic designated district. 10.6 value in 2010, and 16% more value in 2015. Oh, too far. On average, we found that historic districts ranged anywhere, they gave value to your home, anywhere from 6% up to 35%. Not a bad statistic. And again, the only difference, as close as we could make it, was the only difference between the neighborhoods was designated and non-designated. So what is all this designation? Well, we have the National Register, you've heard state, historic, you've heard local designation. I kind of put a thermometer scale on this. What is a National Register? That's the highest designation you have. Well, what does it really do? Well, it protects under Section 106 review, such as very early, and I think one of the reasons Clarkston's historic district was created was the fact that there was a proposed state widening of Main Street between Dixie and the freeway. Well, that came under Section 106 review. It wouldn't have had that review had the historic district not been there. The restrictions, Secretary of Interior standards, they ask you to comply with those, but only if you're taking historic tax credits are using funds from the federal government. Outside of that, if you have a National Register of Historic Home or something, you can pretty much darn well do what you want with it without further penalty. Unless you're using federal tax dollars or taking historic tax credits. The incentives, of course, is 20% credit on the qualified expenditures. State designation, yeah, well, that's kind of gives you an honor. You can buy a marker. You can buy the marker. There's no restrictions on it other than gives you the right to buy the marker. Local designation, on the other hand, that's where the restrictions come. And when I look at it, I usually tell my students, this is democracy at its finest, because you're not being told what to do by the federal or state governments. You're putting the restrictions on yourself. It's your neighbors that's telling what you should or shouldn't do. And you all benefit by that guidance. Janet, I think you were helpful in this, in getting the new state tax credit in. And now this extends to single-family residential. That's in a local or on the National Register. And what is it, 25%?
25%, and the new proposed bill, House Bill 5430, proposes it be 30% on your credit on your investment in your home.
You're going to tell them all that
Oh,
stuff. Yeah. I won't get into it. Anyway, this is some of the economics of it. Now, there's other things on this that we look at. I keep going the wrong way, sorry about that. First of all, what's the cultural value of this? This is a beautiful home. Beautiful home. This is kind of the top of the scale, right? This is the founder of Clarkston. The home that they lived in. And I like this idea because it goes from the Greek revival to an arts and crafts.
Right.
And you know what? They're both historic. That's the way the national guidelines work. That you can have an addition that has over time become significant in its own right, which has happened here. But then on the other side, you have this little home. How many know who lived in this home? One person. Yeah. You don't know what it said?
Frank Yeager,
And he was
the blacksmith.
the village blacksmith. And how can you tell that was a village blacksmith? You notice a little stoop right here? The horseshoe. That's the beauty of historic preservation. It can be at the highest level of the people that created your town, down to the village blacksmith and where they lived. And a beautiful little downtown. Now, can you imagine a 4-lane highway going through it, connecting Dixie to the nearest exit and entrance to the I-75? Oh my God. You think you're experiencing rumbles now. It would totally destroyed town. It would totally destroy it. So, my last concluding thing is I'm going to take you on a little tour of Clarkston. Starting about 1980, this was an addition. This was the survey that was done by, I don't know who started the survey, back in the late 70s.
Oh, Susan Isinger?
Yeah. And I'm not going to say anything, because I went through, this is the way we saw it. I looked at it as a community that, boy, it could have gone either way. If you could have thought of another lane or 2 lanes going through downtown, but then you would see this time and time again. And which way was Clarkston going to go? So I'll just let you be the judge. Then, a few years ago. 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 Here's one of my historic. Yeah, you've met Winston before, right? Good guy, good guy. Winston is one of my favorite historical, I guess I should say characters, right? His quotes are marvelous. And the quote I'm going to show you, you have to give you some background information on it. During World War II, after a midnight or night bombing of London, the next morning he gets up and he goes on tour with the Department of Public Works director, and they're taking a tour of the bombed out sites. And the director of Public Works says, oh, we got all these visions and how we can do it. And after the war, this is what we can do here, what we can do here. Churchill pulls him aside and he says, it's all fine and good. But don't let spacious plans for a new world divert your energies from saving what's left of the old. And I looked at, when I was back in class, before there was historic preservation per se, before there was the environmental movement, I kind of hit on it as just a natural. It was a natural, it hit on all the cylinders of saving our buildings and finding reuse for them, economically, environmentally, and culturally. And I think Winston Churchill had kind of the same idea back in 40-41 with his comments to his building inspectors. So with that, I'm done.
She needs that.
I knew I had to give you something.
Every time I come to Clarkston, I realize what a precious community we have. It's a gem. It's a gem, and it's fragile, and it's worth taking care of. I'm going to sit back here with you because I like to attend my own lectures.
That's the best line I've heard in a long time. I might borrow.
Thank you in class part. Interesting, nervous. I'm sitting right next to him. Yeah, thank you. I don't want it.
Ron, thank you very much. You did part one, and he and I do present a lot, but we also spent a couple hours talking yesterday to make certain that when we jive in terms of what we're presenting today. So I'm doing part 2, and I'm Janet Kreger. Thank you, Julie, for the introduction, and Bill for queuing up my show. I do most of my programs for the Michigan Historic Preservation Network because we do get support from the Michigan Arts and Culture Council for the public work that we do. I'm going to be talking about Michigan's program, and what's nice is that a lot of the content that I will go through will dovetail with things that Ron has said, and also what Nancy was speaking of. So if you remember to the part of the show where we were talking about Michigan's State Historic Preservation Office, the SHPO, that was established approximately 1970 in our state. It was right on the heels of the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So we weren't like leading the pack, but we certainly didn't pull up the rear in terms of establishing our State Historic Preservation Office. I worked in that office when I just got out of graduate school, and it was one of the best experiences I ever could have had because for 12 years I came to communities like Clarkston and worked with the local people who were working on the preservation activities in the state. And that's why I know the community quite well. The SHPO administers incentive programs for the state and federal tax credits. We'll get into those, but those have been alluded to already. And they also do pass-through grants to certified local governments, and that's been mentioned as well. Clarkston has been involved in SHPO programs for almost 5 decades. And as you can see from the before and after, or then and now photos that Ron was showing you, it's very apparent that you have been very focused on preservation activities for a long time. I work throughout the state, and I've seen many communities not tend to their historic resources, and they're just lost. So let's talk a little bit more about the National Register of Historic Places. It is the official list of the nation's cultural resources. And as of August of 2024, there were 1,985 National Register listings in Michigan. Many of those are for individual properties, but many of them are for historic districts. For example, in Clarkston, your district has 172 buildings in it. So that 1,985 figure is much amplified because there are communities such as the Civic Park Historic District in Flint that has well over 1,000 buildings. The Heritage Hill Historic District in Grand Rapids is similarly large. So this is many more individual properties. It was the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, by the way, that established the National Register. The benefits of National Register listing, again, this should sound familiar to you because our speakers have been speaking of it. First and foremost, there's the consideration and planning opportunity to speak up if federally funded licensed or assisted projects could damage a National Register listed resource. And that's under Section 106, which was mentioned. Clarkston did a fabulous save when there was federally funded projects initiated, not initiated, but suggested for the widening of Main Street. That may have been what established the National Register, but it was just in the nick of time. Because it did go through the 106 process. It went through the process when I was just a young professional in the State Historic Preservation Office, so I remember it well. And you thwarted the expenditure of that money and saved the downtown. That sort of protection is on the line should National Register designation ever be lost. National Register designation also gives you access to the state and federal tax credits for the work that you do on historic commercial buildings and under the state credit on your residential buildings as well. For income-producing properties, the federal credit is 20% on the costs incurred that are qualified, meaning they're appropriate to the historic building. For the state credit, it's 25%, and as I already shouted out because I couldn't contain myself, that under House Bill 5430, we want to raise that to 30%, not only for residential, but the smaller commercial buildings. By the way, if you qualify for both the state and the federal, you can piggyback them, meaning you can get up to 45% off on the cost that you incur. Now, we just got the state credit back in 2020, and the program geared up in 2022. When I think of all the investment that went into residential properties during the pandemic because you didn't have anything else to do but work on your house, oh my goodness. And by the way, the final benefit, credibility for what you do, that can't be understated. It's impressive to be able to say, oh yes, my community is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, because it is an impressive credential. You've gone through a lot of work to get it. So in red at the bottom is the point that Ron was making too. It's important to note that listing in the National Register does not prevent a private citizen from altering their building in any way they want. When I was quite young in the field, I remember outside of Owasso, a farmer, significant Greek Revival structure, pristine on his farm, and he didn't, it was National Register listed, and he didn't want it to go to his offspring, so he burned it. He burned it down. That was heartbreaking. Another important thing about the National Register is Clarkston was an early listing on the National Register. National Register, well, in a very specific way. National Register gets underway with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act in 1966. Your district was passed in 1980. It was just a decade after the State Historic Preservation Office was founded. It's just a decade after. And at that time, again, I remember as a young professional, National Register designations were almost like cherry picking. You did the Capitol, you did the county courthouses, you did the most significant homes, you did the churches, individual structures, the very finest individual buildings. Well, somehow, Clarkston decided to do a district. Not only a district with over 150 contiguous buildings, but it was a mixture of residential and commercial. I can just see the National Register review folks in Washington getting this in 1980 and going, oh, what is this? What is this? But it was passed. And you already know, along your residential streets, some of the loveliest examples of very, very fine design. So I want you to remember, National Register, the protection that it offers is only for federally funded, licensed, and assisted projects. That's why it's important that you have a local historic district too. Local historic district is a significant area that you yourself have established. You appoint a commission, you make decisions under the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation so that decisions are standardized. And when there's a well-conceived project, the property owner can go forward with a certificate of appropriateness and do the work. That's very important, local historic districts. In Michigan, the Local Historic Districts Act, Public Act 169 of 1970. I have been working with Public Act 1970 for almost 50 years. It designates an area as a local historic district. It's one of the few ways that a community can provide a legal framework to have better oversight of its growth and change in the district and to protect the investments of those who maintain their historic buildings. The point I'm making, National Register designation and local designation, it's not a belt and suspenders situation. There's not redundancy in the protections that they offer. They dovetail. You actually want both of them. And the Michigan Historic Preservation Network, which we founded in 1981, it has been working tirelessly since 1981. Whenever you have a National Register district, you need a local protective ordinance to protect it effectively. Again, Clarkston was a very early community to align with statewide practices. In 1992, Public Act 169 was updated to better reflect national preservation standards. And a few of the most important changes, the U.S. Secretary of the Interior standards were established as the baseline for consistent design review. Commission actions were taken out of the purview of local government so that review decisions could be standardized with application of the Secretary's standards. Prior to the updates to Public Act 169, if there were an appeal made to a decision of the Commission, it stayed in an appeal process that was a tempest in a teapot at the local level. Third, appeals of Commission decisions were no longer heard locally, but rather provided consistent review by the State Historic Preservation Review Board, guided by an administrative law judge. I sat on the State Historic Preservation Review Board for half a dozen years prior to the pandemic and ended my tenure as chair. We saw very few appeals. Communities just work it out locally under local protective ordinances. There are means to do that. Appeals that made it to the State Historic Preservation Office, it would be, a dozen every year. And that's with 81 communities doing reviews. In Clarkston, maybe a few reviews each month. In the city of Detroit, hundreds. Also added with the 1992 changes were commissions could intervene in cases of demolition by neglect. And the commissions finally could take steps to protect significant buildings that were eligible for listing but not yet registered under the local ordinance. You've already heard Clarkston is one of 81 Michigan communities that have chosen to establish their own protective ordinance. And I have a pretty trained eye. I can always tell a community where you have a Main Street program, a local protective ordinance, National Register designation, certified local government status. It's real clear to me. All I have to do is kind of, check on the web when I get home. What does that community have? When you come into Clarkston, it is very clear. You've been working for 50 years on this. Current issues faced by local historic districts. First, surveys are out of date. Yours has just been updated, or you're in the process of updating it. Second, a current issue, which actually is a perennial issue. New property owners all the time. They buy in, they don't necessarily know that they're buying into a community with this long a legacy of historic preservation. Educational efforts need to be constant. And third, also perennially and very much in Oakland County, the development pressures are constant. There's always somebody eyeing property in a community as charming as Clarkston is. it would be good to suggest that Clarkston is located in the 36 square mile area of Independence Township. And you know that Clarkston is one of the smallest municipal units in the state. It's less than half a mile. And a lot of that is water. Can't you figure out someplace else for development other than in a gem of an historic district? You can have new development, absolutely, but protect what you've got. Winston Churchill said that. Thank you, Ron. The benefits for the work you do, we'll just note 3. There is the Michigan Historic Preservation Tax Credit. Now you've heard a number of things about it. 25% investment tax credit. And that was a program reinstituted in 2020 with the efforts of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. Our earlier tax credit program, which the Michigan Historic Preservation Network also established, it ran between 1999 and 2011 when all the credits were eliminated by Governor Snyder. During that period of time, however, it leveraged $71 million in state tax credits to generate almost $1.5 billion of investment in Michigan communities. It leveraged $251 million in federal tax credits. It never would have come back to the state. It created 36,000 jobs, and in all, our statistic was every dollar of credit leveraged $10.56 in direct economic impact. Those arguments did not hold any water with Governor Snyder, and off they went along with the movie credits and every credit. He did not believe in credits. And consider Oakland County. My stats will not quite align with Ron because he was doing the stats for the Main Street program and I'm doing them for the whole county. Between 1999 and 2011, Oakland County had 1,063 state and federal tax credit projects representing $1.5 billion in investment. Not Oakland County, but for the state. Oakland County had 45 of those projects. Total investment was $9 million. State tax credits awarded $907,000, and federal tax credits $1.3 million. Basic to the tax credit, and you have a handout in your that you picked up, talks about the tax credits. Needs to be a certified structure. You have state register listed properties, and they're also covered by a local protective ordinance. Buildings that are contributing to those districts may be eligible for the credit. The work needs to be a certified rehabilitation, meaning it needs to be in character with the property and in keeping with the Secretary's standards. Process is fairly simple. Three levels of applications are submitted before, during, after. And credits are awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. Currently, the new state tax credit that we got back has a cap of $5 million in credits, and that disappears immediately. House Bill 5430 is exploding that figure so that it better matches what the need is.
Can that be inside or outside the house?
It can be both inside and outside. It has to be within the envelope, in or on the envelope of the building. And then even some features of work that are outside the envelope of the historic building, for example, barrier-free accommodations, can also be covered by the credit. I've alluded to the fact the credit cap currently is $5 million. The distribution of that $5 million in credits is $1 million for owner-occupied residential projects. And then the next two categories, it illustrates for you how inadequate the current credit cap is. The $5 million annually, $2 million is for small commercial projects with an investment of up to $2 million. So for example, if a project has an investment of $1 million and claims a credit of $25,000 or $250,000 in credits, there can be, in the whole state, 8 projects of similar size. And it becomes even more reduced for the larger projects. Briefly, what are the standards for historic preservation? We've alluded to those many times. They're sort of biblical for the field. To be eligible for the credits, you need to be following them. The standards, there are 10. Nationally accepted, they've been in place since 1976. Just a few of them. Top, a property shall be used for its historic purpose. Second, the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. Fifth, distinctive features and finishes and construction techniques shall be preserved. Sixth, deteriorated historic features shall be repaired rather than replaced. Ninth, new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property, and the new work shall be differentiated from the old and be compatible. Finally, new additions and adjacent or related new construction shall be undertaken in a manner that, if removed, the essential form and integrity of the property is maintained. The federal tax credit program, again, we'll go quickly because we've been talking about it, administered by the State Historic Preservation Office and the Park Service, needs to be a certified historic structure. The work needs to be certified as well. It's a 20% investment tax credit only on income-producing properties. It doesn't have a residential feature. Best is that there's no credit cap. It's been in place since 1976 and has done a world of good in the state of Michigan. And it can be combined with the state credit. The Certified Local Government Program is one that is administered through the State Historic Preservation Office. There are 42 certified local governments in Michigan, and there are 4 communities that have fairly sophisticated preservation programs. They have a protective ordinance, they do survey, they have public input into their activities. They have an historic district commission. They provide for public participation. They establish goals for what they're doing. Why you become a CLG is not only recognition of the sophistication of the program that you might have, but it does create a stronger local program. You are eligible for sub-grants. We've alluded to that. At least 10% of the annual Historic Preservation Fund grant that's made to the SHPO must be distributed to CLGs. We also have priority support from SHPO and training and education. And just thinking that you might be interested, here are a number of the projects that were done with the 2024 distribution of $250,000 in grants exclusively for CLG communities. City of Charlevoix, City of Coldwater, City of Detroit, City of Flat Rock with an Historic District Commission training, Holland, replacing a roof on the museum, City of Livonia, South Barn design plans at Greenmead, and Washington County, which is right near me, Borden Hall basement and foundation rehabilitation. So they're all over the map. You may have your reasons why you preserve. Ron's alluded to his. Nancy wouldn't have done the work she's done if she didn't have a vision for what preservation can be in Clarkston. Personally, I see that it enhances the quality of our environment and our lives. It serves as a planning and economic tool. It protects and it reflects a commitment to resources in your community that are irreplaceable. The end of part 2.
Okay, so we We have two very well-versed individuals in the room. Are there any questions about historic districts or historic preservation for these two experts?
I was curious, does landscaping under that jurisdiction as well on a
Yeah.
historic piece of property?
Yes.
Yeah.
Both under the National Register and with Public Act 169, the Historic District Commission has an opportunity to review and administer buildings, structures, sites, objects, features, open spaces, both man-made and natural. They're both historic and not historic. It's very complete coverage.
Any other questions?
I guess I'd ask a question of clarification if I could. So the National Register doesn't look at individual properties, as in, if my house was on the National Registry and I could burn it down like the vindictive
Yeah,
man.
you could.
So the dovetail that you spoke about was essentially that the local government is responsible for the ongoing preservation, which is what essentially keeps up the quality to keep it qualified under the national in the collective.
That's exactly right. And why we propose that you always have the two together like that is that you can have a National Register historic district. If you don't have a protective ordinance, or you have a disabled protective ordinance, you have a National Register property, you're getting the 20% investment tax credit, you're doing your best to conserve your historic property, but without a protective ordinance, you don't know what your neighbors are doing. You invest the kind of money it takes to really do a great job, and you have no idea what sort of erosion is taking place around you. And an eroded National Register historic district can be delisted. Nancy, you presented at the review board last month, or your David was presented to the review board. There were 4 properties that were removed from the register at that meeting. I was on the review board. We took buildings and districts and struck off the National Register regularly because of erosion, aesthetic erosion.
I think part of that too, the property values, that you see the difference between historic designated neighborhoods and non-designated neighborhoods. People have that security. I'm going to invest because I know my adjacent property owners are invested and it's protected. And that's, I think, why you see that high value consistently in the designated historic district.
I have a question over here as well.
Quick question. I don't completely understand. Let's say I own one of these homes and I get a property tax statement twice a year. Is that what we're talking about? The credit comes on that tax statement?
No.
Or is that something totally different?
It's taken off if you're a residential property owner, it's taken off your income tax. You probably haven't noticed it, but when you file for your income tax, it gives you an opportunity, I don't know what line it is, to indicate if you have a credit. You can take the credit over the course of 5 years, because I don't know about you, but if I restored my home, I don't have a tax liability to absorb all at once the credit that I might get on the rehabilitation. So it allows you to do it for 5 years.
So it is based on your property taxes?
Yes, it doesn't affect anything in terms of your.
I think there was it's not based on your property taxes.
Income tax.
For example,
It's-
if you were to invest X number of dollars in restoring historical windows,
Okay.
just like if you in the past, if you restored, put a new furnace in or something, you would get a tax credit for the furnace. If we're a qualified historical district, you're able to get a tax credit, income tax credit if you apply for it, for the portion of the investment you made to restore your historical windows. It has nothing to do with property tax. Does that make sense?
So what is the credit?
If you invested $10,000 in a new furnace,
Oh, okay, I get it. Yes, I get it now.
It takes a village to explain the tax.
It's a credit on your federal income. Well, it's on federal as well as your state.
federal, I think it's, I don't know without looking, but you have the opportunity to apply in federal, and assuming you probably do on the state as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know that for a fact. You'd have to look at the state.
And that's one of the benefits in the commercial, and is what Janet alludes to, is that you may not be able to absorb all that tax credit in a year to extend it. Or a developer could take those tax credits and sell them to somebody that says, okay, and I'll pay you 80 cents on the dollar. I get the full tax credit, I'll give you 80 cents on the dollar to spend however you want. So they become beneficial both ways, both for the individual as well as for the project.
Is there a minimum amount you have to invest to be able to apply for the credit, you know?
Yeah, it is, it's your state equalized value, half of that. Oh, excuse me, property, and then your state equalized value is half of that, and you must, the threshold is 10% expenditure,
Thank you.
which is quite low,
Do we have any examples of any commercial property owners that have used the tax credit yet?
Here in Clarkston? Not that I'm familiar.
Right here in town, the owner of Rudy's used the tax credits on their recent rehabilitation program.
That would have been under the old, I checked the current program that we've had in place since 2022. Again, no one has taken it. Of the 42 projects that we've had so far, no one's taken it in Clarkston yet. But I didn't check for the 1999 to 2011 program. Oakland County's got plenty of projects, but I can't say for sure. It would have been noteworthy had there been lots of use. Like I know, one of the biggest users of the state tax credit between 1999 and 2011 was Houghton. Houghton, Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, Detroit, Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor used it all the time, particularly the homeowners with the state tax credit. So there wouldn't have been many, or else I would have remembered it.
My supervisor at work, he used the tax credit for his home in the district.
Yeah.
Any questions? Thank you both. I would like to thank Ron and Janet. I'd also like to thank Nancy for her update. For my Harwood partner and technical person here, Bill. ITV for recording today. They will be posting that on the ITV website. And everyone who assisted with all the logistics, thank you very much.